Good afternoon. We're happy to have UNT Survivor Advocates team with us today. I'd like to introduce Esther D. Opong. She is the Assistant Director of Student Advocacy, Outreach, and Violence Prevention in the Dean of Students Office. With her today is Callie Stanford. She's a graduate assistant for the Dean of Students Office and also a survivor advocate. Today, they're going to spend some time with us to tell us a little bit about who they are, what they do, and how they got there. Thank you both so much for being here. I'm going to turn it over to our moderator for today's session. She's a Career Center staff member. She is the graduate assistant for the internship team. Her name is Macy Merriweather, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Jeanette, and thank you, Esther and Callie, again for being here. So I'd just like to start off with you both telling us kind of about a day in the life of a survivor advocate, and if there were any duties that you have that maybe you didn't expect to, that weren't in your job description, and then just what you do day to day.
I will say that a day in the life of the survivor advocate pre-COVID looks quite a bit different than what it looks like right now in the midst of the pandemic. And so, we'll say a normal day, whenever I'm on campus and Callie is on campus, our days never actually look the same. So, in general, whenever we come into the office, the first things that we're doing are responding to any new referrals that we received over the past day or in the evening before. And referrals are the ways that we get contact with students. And so when someone has a concern about a student who has experienced sexual or relational violence, trauma, or harassment, they're able to submit a report online through report.unt.edu that talks a little bit about the nature of the incident that the student experienced. And that allows us to initiate contact with the student. So the first part of the day, and really all through the day whenever we receive referrals, we are reaching out to students to introduce ourselves, let them know that we're here to help, and then finding out what kinds of things that they need. And so our subsequent contacts with them might mean that we're scheduling appointments for them to come in and meet with us. It could mean that we're reaching out to instructors to ask for academic advocacy or flexibility or leniency. It could mean that we're scheduling appointments for them to meet with a counselor over at the Counseling and Testing Center or at UNT Well. It could also mean that we're getting them scheduled to see someone over at the Student Health and Wellness Center if they needed to get tested following an incident. And so a lot of our day is spent either meeting with students or reaching out to them following referrals. But then there are also parts of the day when we are doing things like this. We're doing presentations. We might be going to a classroom or going to a student organization to talk to them about who we are and what we do, and what kind of resource we provide on campus. Callie, what about you?
Yeah, so just like Esther said, our priority throughout the day, incoming referrals we get for individuals who've experienced trauma, violence, harassment. Um, and so throughout the day, we're responding to those emails. There may be walk-ins. The number of walk-ins we've had has, of course, reduced since the beginning of this year. But we do virtual appointments now too, so I might be meeting with students throughout the day, either via phone or Zoom. We do check-ins, so if a student gets referred to our office and they're needing support and services from us, or even if they're not really sure that they need anything right now, we like to keep checking in. Not so much where it's like every day we're saying, hey, what's going on, but enough to where the students know that we're here for them for as long as they need us to be here for them. And so beyond responding to reports and checking in on students, we might be working on like educational programming or content that might go out on our right now it is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So looking at programming surrounding domestic violence, either teaching people about what it means to have a healthy relationship or talking about statistics related to domestic violence and things like that. And
Now, as far as
both kind of that individual, like one-on-one working with students component, and then also the outreach component, which it's a lot of people.
Yes, I'm so sorry for the interruption, Kelly. So as far as some additional responsibilities that we didn't anticipate or things that I didn't anticipate when I got into this work, One of the major things, or one of the primary things, is that Callie's job is actually funded by a grant that we received from the Office of the Attorney General through the state of Texas. And so in order to continue to receive that funding, we do have to submit quarterly reports for the grant that include information about the demographics of the students that we work with, as well as what kind of violence they experienced, and then what kind of referrals or support that we provided them with. And so that is a grant that we've received every year since the office has been in existence. At UNT, the office has been here since 2015. So this is its 5th year at UNT. And we've received the grant every year, which I'm so thankful for, because Callie is my lifeline. We work really well together, and it's so important to have additional support there. And so writing the grant is something that I had zero experience or expertise in prior to coming to this work. And so that was something that I didn't expect. And then additionally, with the programming, the survivor advocate is responsible for providing education and programming to the UNT community. And so I definitely came into this position anticipating that I was going to be working with students pretty heavily. I didn't know how much programming is going to be involved with that as well. And so just learning how to adapt programming quickly, especially in this online format. So taking things from an in-person format to a virtual format and still being able to deliver meaningful content virtually. That's been a little bit of an adjustment for, I think, everyone this year. So those are a couple of the things that we didn't expect, or that I didn't expect. And then I'll share one more, which is we are very fortunate to have the use of a safe room on campus. And so when we have students who are leaving a very serious and dangerous situation, something that would be like imminent danger. So if they return home today, their partner is at risk of killing them. This could be a high lethality risk situation. We do have the ability to house that person temporarily in a safe place in an undisclosed location on campus. And so that was something that I didn't know about until I came to this position. But it's so nice to be able to have access to that space. And so it's furnished, and we've got food and toiletries and linens and things that make it feel really homey, even for someone who knows that they're not home but needs a safe place to stay. And so sometimes our day might also involve facilitating the use of that room and maybe escorting someone over there just so that they're safe and we're able to get them into a good place to stay.
Yeah, and there definitely is an administrative component to the job, still working in higher ed. So weekly, I track our numbers. Esther and I both have to track, how many phone calls did we make? How many emails did we do? How many students did we reach out to? How many new cases did we create? Where did those referrals come from? What specific type of referral was it? And so keeping track too, really, of the quantitative measures of what we're doing. And definitely Esther and I are more on the humanistic side of things. We're more people. And so it's definitely a balance in making sure that you have both the administrative skill set and that personable, interpersonal skill set.
Fantastic. Thank you both for sharing. My next question that I have is if there were any myths that y'all were, that you catch yourself busting a lot, just preconceptions that people have about your job, and then what in reality that is.
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind is people think that if they come to us, it means that they have to speak to the police, or it means they have to speak to somebody in conduct or in the Office of Equal Opportunity. I think there's a lot of fear surrounding reporting through either legal means or through the university's system. And so sometimes people get us confused with them. They think that we're doing the investigation when a report is made, or they're afraid that we are immediately going to call the police, and that's not quite the case. There are some things that we are legally required to report. So if somebody discloses that somebody has hurt hurt them, sexual violence, relational violence, sexual harassment, anything that violates Title IX or UNT's code of conduct. And that way we do have to report those things if they give us a name, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to go through the investigation or that we even do the investigating. We have nothing to do with that. We don't contact any of the people who the complaint is against. We are only here for the survivors. We're just here to provide support and services. We're not here to get anyone into trouble or to force someone to do something or report something that they're not wanting to report. So we try to be really upfront about what we do and do not have to report, and try to take some of that fear out of it.
Yeah, I would echo what Callie shared. I think a lot of the time people think that survivor advocate role is going to be very similar to what like Olivia Benson does on Law and Order SVU, where we're busting down the doors and we're really intervening in a very meaningful way. And that part is super important, but our job and the work that we do here and even the subsequent investigations that happen through conduct don't actually have any legal standing. They're specifically covered under Title IX, which is to protect students on college campuses or federally funded institutions from discrimination based on sex. And so we don't do any busting down doors, but we are here to support the survivor, whatever that looks like. I think sometimes people also have the idea that everyone that comes in is going to tell us their full story and that we're going to have the entire picture of the victimization that someone experienced, and then we're going to walk them through healing step by step. And so the truth is that when students come in to meet with us, they are at varying levels of readiness to discuss what happened to them. Sometimes they can't even tell us out loud what happened. Sometimes they are ready to talk more about it, but a lot of the time when we've received inquiries about what we do and if people can shadow, they're very interested or curious to see, like, when someone comes in from the beginning and they're as broken as possible and they're in the worst possible place, how we take them from there to the point of healing. And that's just not really what we do. We help to facilitate that for sure. And in the beginning, we provide a lot of practical assistance for them to help address things that feel very overwhelming in a moment. So for an example, if a student has missed 2 or 3 weeks of classes because they were sexually assaulted and the person who did it is maybe in the same class as they are or is in the same classroom building at the same time, it can be really overwhelming to try and talk to 4 or 5 different instructors to explain to them why you've missed class or why you haven't been able to attend. And so for us, it's a matter of sending an email that introduces the survivor advocate and lets them know that their student has been working with the Dean of Students on an ongoing, very sensitive situation that has maybe inhibited or prevented them from being able to engage and attend classes. And then we ask them for flexibility or leniency and things like that. But we can provide those services to students without them ever having fully disclosed everything that happened to them, much like Callie said. Students don't have to report in order to receive services from the survivor advocate, but also we are very aware that our role is specific to the survivor advocate UNT, and there are so many other people on campus who are well suited to do some of the other more intensive work, which is why we refer out to counseling and testing, why we get them connected to legal services, why we put them in touch with medical professionals, because we want to be the link to bridge the gap between what the students need and what they have access to. But we also don't want to take the place of those professionals who are extremely qualified to be able to provide support to students. But also, there's one other misconception that people might have, which is that this job is very depressing and heavy all the time. Now, I won't say that it isn't depressing and heavy at sometimes, because we are dealing with real life and very tragic situations that happen to students who just didn't deserve that. And we always want students to know that. But also, Callie and I are daily inspired by the resilience of the people that we work with and their refusal to let what happened to them define them and limit them. You know, like, it slows them down. Obviously, things like that are a setback. It's unexpected. It's unfair. It never should have happened. But I can't tell you how many times I've been so humbled by the students that I work with, and just watching them overcome and watching them persist and go even further than before. And sometimes it even changes their focus academically, and maybe they change their major from whatever it was to something that does get them more involved in the helping professions so that they're able to assist other students or other people who have been through something similar to what they've been through. And so there are tough days in this job, but we are so inspired every day by the people that we work with, because they show us every single day what resilience looks like and what it looks like to be tenacious and to persevere and to persist and continue even through the most difficult times.
Agreed, 100%. This job takes good emotional boundaries because do hear we hear about student experiences, and we don't meet students in the best times of their lives, clearly. But we do get the opportunity to see the resiliency and the strength and the dedication of students. We've had so many survivors we've worked with who, just like Esther said, have decided, I want to help people now. I want to work with people who've had these experiences. I want to create places of support around campus, and to take one of the worst experiences you've gone through and decide that you want to do something about it is really powerful. And so, yeah, I think those things keep us going. And then two, because we are able to provide practical solutions, I think that is also another part of the job that's really helpful. Is I know that I can email faculty and say, hey, this student's having a hard time. They're working with us on an ongoing situation. Please be flexible about missed assignments. And the faculty respond. And they're like, yeah, however I can help this student. And so to know that we can give like actual practical things to make somebody's situation more manageable is empowering and helps us keep going every day, or at least it does for me, for sure.
Is that hard with the anonymity with the faculty? So you give the faculty member the FYI, and do they keep that to themselves and just keep it in mind in terms of the students' assignments?
We're very vague. So literally the language that I use is either ongoing sensitive situation or it's ongoing Title IX situation. And so I imagine that when someone receives an email from me and they see Survivor Advocate in my signature line, they may have an idea of what's happened, but we do not give any specifics. It's up to a student to decide whether they want to disclose that or not. It's also up to a student whether we do academic advocacy or not. So I never reach out to a faculty on a student's behalf without first getting permission from the student and explaining exactly what I'll be writing. And then I also CC the student into it so the student sees exactly what it is. So Esther and I take the privacy of our students very seriously. But also the faculty we've reached out to time and time again have mostly been very supportive, which is a big help.
Good.
So the only identifying piece of information that we put into the message is the student's name and ID number, just so that the faculty member knows to which student we're referring. But outside of that, we won't put any details about what the student has shared with us, aside from what Callie said, which is, hey, they're working with the survivor advocate, they're working with the dean of students on a situation that's created some anxiety, some distress, and then we ask them for whatever it is. And so we also mention in the message that the student will follow up with each instructor personally to be able to discuss the details of their class or the details of their need. And so if it's just one or two missed assignments, or maybe it's a quiz or a paper that they need to submit, then they can follow up with the instructor to facilitate that. If it's multiple instructors, we don't know the details of all those classes. And so one way or the other, we still put the ball back in the student's hands so that they're able to make contact with the instructors accordingly. And so I think the theme that we want you guys to know running through all of this is that even though we can help to facilitate these services for the students, we want them to be in charge of telling us what they need, because so much of what happened to them before meant that they didn't have any power. They didn't have the autonomy to choose how those things went. And so in addition to providing the support, the practical support for them to move through the process, we also want them to be in charge of making the decisions about how and when we do that. And so sometimes we'll offer those services and they tell us, no, I don't think I need that right now. And then they might come back a little bit later on and say, actually, you know what? I did try to reach out to this instructor and it felt really uncomfortable. Could you help me with that? I didn't need this before, but I feel like I might now. I didn't want to report this before, but I feel like I want to now. And then we're giving the power back to them to be able to make the decisions about how they use the services we provide. So meeting with the survivor advocate is not mandatory. When we receive the referrals, and we were talking about a day in the life, when we reach out to students, they're not required to come in and meet with us if they choose not to. And when they do, they don't have to tell us anything about what happened. And so every step of the way, from the time that we make contact with the student until the time that they are or aren't in our office, we want them to know that we are here to support. And so they get to drive the ship. We figure out which direction they need to go. Sometimes we'll make recommendations or suggestions based on what they're describing, or we'll just offer them a menu of services that we can provide and then let them choose and ask them like, hey, does any of that connect with you? Do you find yourself in need of this kind of support? If they say yes, then cool, we'll go for it. And if they say no, fine, we are here and you can follow up with us and check in whenever you do need something additional from us.
And we know it's not personal. Everybody's journey is different. And, we have survivors who want to meet with us right away. And we have survivors who will maybe meet with us a year later, 10 months after it happened. And then we have survivors who never want to meet with us. And that's okay. Everyone has the right to make that decision. And we understand it's not personal. I've had a student who, when I called, hung up on me, was like, no, I don't need anything. Bye. And, that's fair. It can be really intimidating, especially after something like that happens and there's so much shame and stigma. And so it's really important when you're in this role or a similar role to understand that everybody's in a different place and that's okay.
Thank you for the question, Amy. That was really good. I kind of want to go off of that a little bit and ask how all of this affects you personally and kind of the ways that you self-care at the end of the day.
That's a great question. Esther actually asked this in my interview because it is a really important question for this job is, what does self-care look like for you? And for me, I think the best self-care is prevention. I think preventing burnout is so much more important than treating burnout. Because if you don't have good self-care practices established, it can be really difficult when you're doing work that requires emotional labor, because this work does require emotional labor. We aren't counselors, but both Esther and I have educational background in counseling, and we do utilize those skills at times. And so for me, it's setting boundaries between work and home, saying, I work on these days at these times, and I generally don't check email on the weekends or during the evenings unless I know specifically I'm doing an after work hours event or there is a specific crisis that I know that is going on that I plan to check in on at a specific time. Otherwise, I try to set pretty firm boundaries about I'm at work at this time or I'm not at work. I also like to make physical reminders that I'm at home and not at work. So when I get home, I change out of my work clothes and I put on home clothes. And so that's like a physical reminder for me that I'm in a separate place. And so I try to do things like that to kind of say, this is me at this role. And then, this is me outside of this role. But I think it also requires, a lot of self-knowledge and doing the work to understand that we're not here to rescue anyone. We're not rescuers. And we don't need to be. The survivors we meet with have survived these situations before they met us. And they're capable of surviving it after us. And so to think that we somehow need to swoop in and be a savior is denying the autonomy and the capacity of the students we work with. And I think that helps a lot to not take on all of these burdens, emotional burdens from the work, or at least that's kind of my perspective. Esther, what do you think?
So the first part of the question was about its personal impact, and I would like to address that part first because I've been at UNT as a student worker, as an employee in some capacity since 2004, so 16 years this year. And for a time, I was an RA on campus, and so I lived in the residence halls, and I've been all over campus, and I remember one of the first after hours programming events I did after I started this job that involved walking from the Union pretty late to Curry Hall to do a presentation. And earlier that week or that day, I had been working with a survivor who was sexually assaulted on her way to work on an on-campus job. And I remember for the very first time, it was, I started this job October 2018. So sometime in that first 3 months or so that I was in this work, I was walking across campus. And it was the first time ever that I was aware of my vulnerability on campus. It was the first time where I didn't feel as carefree and as innocent and as safe walking across campus. Now, I don't think that anything had changed about the campus, but what changed was my awareness of it, because the concentration of my work right now is in trauma. And the students that I work with have all experienced that. And so whenever I'm that close to those situations and hearing those stories, it can be difficult not to internalize that in some way and take it personally and just become more aware of my position on campus and what it looks like to navigate it. And so I remember that. And I remember having to take a little bit of time to grieve the loss of that sense of innocence on campus and the awareness that sometimes really bad things happen. Now, I still love this campus and I mostly feel safe here, but I just remember that shift in awareness. That was something that I didn't expect to experience. And so that's one thing. I also find myself being very mindful about the interactions that I have with people, with new people, and just like being very discerning about what their intentions might be and the way that I engage with people. Because Callie and I do a lot of safety planning with the students that we work with, which involves encouraging them to be aware of their surroundings and be aware of the people with whom they come into contact, patterns of behavior. And so things that didn't really come to the forefront of my awareness before are definitely there now. And so I feel like I navigate the world a little bit differently today as a survivor advocate than I did before. And so, yeah, there is a sense of loss of innocence there, but also I know the things that I know now are protecting me and potentially other people because I'm more equipped to answer those questions or be aware of those dynamics in a relationship or in people's behavior. So that's some of the personal impact. And so I will wholeheartedly echo what Callie said about self-care and being preventive in taking care of yourself rather than trying to repair after everything is already broken down. And so I utilize the services of a counselor outside of my work here because, like Callie said, even though we aren't counselors in this role, we do use our counseling skills every day, and we're taking on the pain and the challenges and the burdens of every student that we work with. And so if they give it to me and then they feel some relief, I now have it and I'm carrying it. And where do I put that? Because for that one student, maybe I'm the first person that they've spoken to, but they're definitely not the first student that I have spoken to. And so I'm hearing these stories day after day, week after week, and it does accumulate and it does begin to weigh on me. And so it has been so helpful to have my own counselor just to be able to talk through and decompress, and work through some really difficult cases, and it's also helpful to have Callie, who does the same work that I do, so that we have one another to be able to check in sometimes and provide support that's like real time and in the moment. And hey, this is what's happening. How are you doing with this? Are you okay? But I also find that when I'm able to get outside and exercise or just do something physical that clears my head. That's helpful because it's active and it's much like Callie said, just taking me out of the work mode and putting me into a different mode that I'm able to get back in touch with who I am rather than just what I do all of the time. And so when I'm able, I love to travel. That's something that I find a lot of joy in. I love to cook and bake. And so those are all things that I like to do that feel personal to me that have nothing to do with the work that I do, and also help to preserve my sanity, and energize me so that I'm ready to be here for the students.
And I want to echo what Esther said. I think working on a team is so important. Like, I can't imagine doing this work alone because, if we get a particularly difficult report in or an absurd report in, being able to laugh or curse about it or just whatever with Esther is so helpful, and it really does lighten it for us. Or, even just if a survivor I'm working with has a problem and I'm not quite sure what support or resource to do it, I can bounce ideas off of Esther and we can figure it out together. And so we really all work together to um, make sure that we're kind of addressing what comes up.
That's good that you all have such a good team to be able to do all of that. So Callie, you talked a little bit about your education background, and Esther, you talked about like the time that you've spent with UNT. I'm wondering if you could tell us, both of y'all, about how you got to be in this position, your educational background, and then your journey to becoming in this survivor advocacy position.
Esther, do you want to go first?
Sure. So, I feel like sometimes people are just built for a certain kind of work. Some people are really built to engage with others. Some people are very prominent in their leadership capacities. Like some people are just built for the kind of work they do. And I feel like I've been built for work like this. And so my educational background, yes, is in counseling. My master's degree is in the clinical and mental health counseling program here at UNT, and my bachelor's degree was in psychology, also here from UNT. And so all of the positions that I've had since working here have been in some sort of helping capacity. I started out as a student worker in housing, and I was taking housing payments before we had an online like portal for students to be able to make those payments. And then I spent about 7 years working with international students over in the Sponsored and Special Program Center. Um, and in the meantime, I did spend 3 years as an RA on campus in Kerr Hall. And all of those experiences involved working with people who were vulnerable in some way. Now, that wasn't necessarily the presenting concern like it is now in survivor advocacy. But once I graduated with my master's, then I also went to work in the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences as an academic counselor. And I was there for about 5.5 years. And so, with all of those positions, it really just put me in a place of being able to hear people's stories, to see where they came from and how those experiences informed who they are and what they're doing. And so, just working on campus really, I would say, endeared me to the college aged population, who these students are. They've just graduated high school. And so there's a new sense of independence that's really exciting. But then also we find that those students have been through some really intense things, whether it's abusive relationships they endured in high school, or whether it's questions about their sexuality and like who they are in that context. And they're making new decisions about who they want to be and how they want to spend their time and what they believe in. And so um, working with college students like in those contexts was really what got me on the path to start into the counseling field. But in general, I've always been the person that people can come to for reasonable advice or a little bit of comfort or whatever that is. And so when this role first came to UNT, I was interested in it, but since it had never been here before, I didn't really know what it was going to be or what it would look like. And so I continued on in my job as an academic counselor. And then when the job became vacant in 2018, I applied, and it happened really quickly. Like within about 2 weeks, I had applied and interviewed, and then here we are. But again, my focus in my counseling degree was clinical mental health counseling, and with an emphasis on college-aged women and then couples. And so I've been interested in relationship dynamics and what works in a relationship and what doesn't, and just overall the developmental aspect of being new, maybe first time in college, and then that development over time. And so everything that I've done so far, I feel like has really positioned me well to do this work. But outside of that, I was also volunteering with Refuge for Women North Texas, which is a residential aftercare facility for people who've experienced sex trafficking. Maybe they're leaving the sex industry, or have experienced any kind of exploitation. So I was volunteering there. I did my internship at Woman to Woman Pregnancy Resource Center. And so a lot of the work that I did outside of this was also getting me in touch with populations that are similar to what we're working with now. And so I think it's just a little bit of everything, but I feel very thankful for the resources and the positions that I've had until now, because the things that I know about UNT that had nothing to do with survivor advocacy have really been helpful in this context. My advising background was very helpful when sometimes students are talking to us about their options when they're trying to figure out what to do next, about their academics and school stuff, or having some knowledge about immigration can be helpful if we're working with international students. And so everything that I've done, I feel very fortunate to be able to use those skills selectively, but use them very cohesively in this job. So that's kind of the long answer.
Yeah, so I am a graduate assistant. So this position is a part-time position that accompanies me being enrolled in a graduate program at UNT. So I am currently in my last semester of my master's degree in counseling over in the College of Education. And so while this work makes a lot of sense with what I'm doing right now, it definitely wasn't something I always thought I would be doing or be interested in. Um, I came to UNT in 2011 for my undergrad, and my bachelor's is in international studies. So I definitely kind of took a different path than what I thought I was going to. In between my undergrad and my master's, I worked as an admin, and then I continued to work as an admin full time for most of my program before I got to my internship. And I actually really liked working as an admin for UNT. I enjoyed working with students. I enjoyed, though, the interpersonal components the most. I enjoyed meeting students who were applying for our programs and seeing what they wanted to do, and hearing about their goals, and talking to people was always my favorite part. And so I'm really excited that I was able to make the shift as I'm finishing up my program into something that is more student affairs oriented and does a lot more one-on-one work, because then I can kind of incorporate some of those administrative skills that I did learn with the more interpersonal components. And so my master's, like I said, is in counseling. I am focusing on working with adults, and my clinical interest is trauma. So I'm also interning at the same time at Friends of the Family, which is a local nonprofit that works with individuals who've experienced sexual and relational violence. So here at this job, I get to do more of the advocacy component, working with individuals who've experienced trauma. Then in my internship, I get to do more of the counseling component. And I love that balance. I love like I said earlier, the practical things that we get to do here in this role in terms of, connecting people to academic resources, getting them a housing change. And I really do enjoy kind of the mix of skill that this position requires. And I like that I get to use even some of the counseling skills here. There are times when a client or a student comes in to tell their story, and they're having a difficult time emotionally self-regulating, which makes total sense because you've experienced this really traumatic thing, and you're maybe telling somebody, maybe even for the first time, and it's overwhelming. And so just helping a student breathe a little before we kind of determine what to do next. I really enjoy that. Um, and so that's kind of how I ended up here. Post graduation, I would love to continue doing trauma work. And I think this position is going to help me, even if I continue on to a position that is more counseling oriented, understanding what resources I can connect clients to. Because part of the role sometimes of being a counselor is knowing where to refer clients to get additional assistance. So I like that Esther and I can have the same degree and work in the helping field and work with individuals who've experienced trauma and do that in so many different ways. So that's kind of how I ended up here and where I kind of want to go with it. So
Thank you both for sharing your journeys. I'm curious if you could offer any advice for students that are interested in pursuing the careers that y'all are both in right now.
uh, go to therapy. I think if you want to work in any helping profession, whether it's being a survivor advocate, being a social worker, being a counselor, working in public health, being a first responder, anytime you're working with individuals who've experienced trauma, especially if your heart is working with somebody who's had a similar experience to you. Like I said, many survivors want to go on and work with other survivors. You have to go through your own healing process. Esther mentioned she goes to a therapist. I also go to a therapist because it helps me not mix up my stuff with other people's stuff. It helps us be healthier so that when we do work with individuals who are in need, our own stuff isn't coming into play. And so I really do recommend that if you're interested in the helping field, that you kind of do some of your own emotional work before, during, after, continually.
Yes, I agree 100%. And part of that, I would also say, is that if you're interested in this work, please manage your expectations because it's not great all the time, you know. And even though the parts of our work that we get to do that are extremely gratifying do help to sustain us, there are always moments that are just more challenging than you've anticipated. And it can be easy to take someone's response personally if you haven't done your own work. Like if they call back or they hang up on the phone and say like, no, I'm not interested in this, or if they tell you to stop calling them, or if they don't want to come in and meet with you and all of that. If you don't have a good sense of who you are and what your role is, it can be very easy to conflate their own journey with like a rejection of you or who you are and what you have to offer. And um, so some of that just does come with time, but also being able to get a neutral point of view from a counselor or just someone who's there only for you. And then I would also advise that if you're interested in this work, like see if you can do it. See if you're able to volunteer in some capacity that gets you involved in some way. So we've got an intern who's on our call right now. This is Ashley. And Ashley has had the opportunity to intern with us right now, but she also interned with our conduct office on campus. And conduct does a different kind of job than what we do. And so right now, Ashley has the opportunity to get an idea of what we're doing. And that can also to like help to inform what her next steps are going to be. And so this was the same advice that I gave to students when I was an academic counselor, which is if you're telling me that you want to be a child life specialist, if you're telling me that you want to become a psychologist, but you've never spoken to anyone who's done that work, you have no idea what it is, then the worst thing I could see happening for you is that you're doing all of this academic work and putting all this time and energy toward this field without any real understanding of what it is or what they do. And then you graduate, you get into that field and you hate it. You have no experiential learning there, and it just doesn't meet your expectations, or your expectations were ill-informed, and so you didn't know what you were getting yourself into. And so as much as possible, if you're able to expose yourself to this work at some level, on a voluntary basis, because obviously the work that you're getting into should be something that is meaningful to you and maybe brings you some joy or some fulfillment. But if you have no idea what that is, then it's going to be very difficult to find satisfaction in this work. And so manage your expectations and also do your own homework. Be thorough in that because it's not going to be glamorous all the time. And then the other thing that I would encourage people to do is arm themselves with their own little toolkit of resources, both local and also if it's in the context of higher ed, what's available on a campus. Much like I just mentioned a moment ago, as far as my employment at UNT, because I've been here for a while, then it's been nice to be able to create connections with people across campus, but also just know what's available. And so if a student is coming in for advocacy, but also mentions that they're struggling academically, it's nice to be able to know that we can refer them to the Learning Center. If it's a first generation student, we've now got a new first generation center on campus. And so being able to make those connections has been very helpful. But I think that my work here would be much more challenging if I didn't already know some of those things on campus. And so some of the skills that I have, that presenting, and that's another thing. And so if you're going to do this work, you've got to be able to talk to people about it. I'm fortunate that my previous jobs required a lot of presenting, so I feel comfortable in front of groups and being able to speak to things pretty easily. But just being able to maximize the skills that you have, because in this work, you're probably going to use skills that you didn't even know you would need on a daily basis. And so being aware of what you bring to the table and then being able to adapt those things in a situation is very important. And then the final advice that I would give is be flexible because this, like a day in our life is never the same, but also be gentle with yourself because it can be really challenging sometimes when you are working with someone who is in such obvious pain or distress and you want to help them. You see them, you made a personal connection, you see what a phenomenal person they are, and you're feeling angry or feeling frustrated on their behalf. You're feeling protective of this person and you want to intervene, you want to be able to take the pain away. And that's so real, and we experience that every single day. But I want to go back to something that Callie said, which is we can't rescue people. And that's not our job. We don't save people here, but we can sit with them and let them know that they're not alone while they're going through what they're going through. And so when you are in those situations and you're also feeling powerless to help someone or take the pain away, it's okay to give yourself a little bit of grace and recognize your humanity in that moment, because that's what makes you a great survivor advocate. Having the personal touch that people can relate to as empathy that says, hey, like I see you and I'm here with you. You're not doing this by yourself and you're not going to have to go through this alone.
Great points. And I think just to speak to your point about getting some experiential, firsthand knowledge, not everyone is going to get to intern with a survivor advocate office. There's not a ton of us across the country, although more and more survivor advocacy offices are being created, that they might be called slightly different things. But there are really two components to this job, main components, right? There's the higher education component, which is the setting in which we work. And then there's also the trauma advocacy component. And so utilize the Career Center to find internships or employment on campus, looking for GA positions and getting your feet wet in terms of working for the university, especially if you can do it on the student affairs side, is good experience. The second part of that is getting experience with like the trauma work part of it, which can be some of the more emotionally taxing parts. And a lot of local domestic violence agencies or agencies that provide resources for sexual assault victims will have volunteer programs. So Denton County Friends of the Family, which is the local nonprofit that works with survivors in Denton, they have a huge volunteer program. Some of them are more emotionally demanding than others. For example, they have a survivor advocacy team that goes and meets with survivors at the hospital after a sexual assault. The training for that's pretty intense. It's a pretty intense volunteer experience, but it can be really amazing experience, and you don't have to have a background in counseling in order to do something like that. And so But they also have like social media volunteers and interns. So, it can be as much or as little as you really want to engage in it. But there are opportunities out there for you to get exposure to all the different levels that surround this kind of work if you care about helping individuals who have been impacted by violence.
Thank you so much. As someone studying my master's in counseling as well, that's very helpful advice for anybody. So thank you. So in closing today, I want to ask both of you what your top 3 takeaways that you would like our audience to remember from today have been.
Oh, good question. I think number one for me would be that if you're interested in helping people, there are so many different ways that it can look like. Survivor advocacy is just one of them, and it can look different even, between Esther and I, what this role means to us, and whether it's something more permanent like what Esther is doing right now, or for me, it's temporary while I'm in my master's. Um, there are just options there in terms of how you utilize this. Uh, Secondly, I think it is really important that you're doing your own work if you want to do this work, which for us means doing your own therapy, but also, being self-reflective, getting experiences that kind of get you exposed to the different aspects of it. And then third takeaway would be, no, just try it out if you're interested.
Um,
Ask questions.
yeah, yes, absolutely. I would say number one, the survivor advocate is here to help. If nothing else, if people don't get anything else from this today, we want you guys to know that we are here to help, and we're here to help on your terms. And so, what you need is what we want to help provide. We want to help to bridge those gaps and provide you with the service that you need. And so, the survivor advocate is here to help. So that's number one. Number two is that we're not able to help if we don't know what's going on. And so we want you guys to remember that we can provide services to you if you're willing to come forward and let us know what you need. We're not going to push or pressure you into doing something that you're not ready for, but we just want to be here to provide support for you at whatever level of healing or trauma that you're at. So we want to be here for you, and we want to have the opportunity to offer that support. Um, and number three is like take care of yourselves. And so, whatever position you're in, whether it is something that does have a higher exposure to emotionally challenging and heavy topics like what Callie and I do, or whether it's something that gives you a little bit more space to process things emotionally, or doesn't require as high an exposure to that, take care of yourself. So whether that does mean meeting with the counselor on your own terms, whether that means educating yourself around your campus, whether that means completing job shadowing, and you're with really great people in the Career Center who can help you to facilitate those opportunities. So, job shadowing to get your own exposure, whether that means establishing a great support system of friends with whom you can talk about things that aren't related to your really heavy work, like whatever those things are, take care of yourself because you can provide the best services to the people that you're working with when you are in the best state of mind. And so, my boss is the dean of students, and she'll tell us often, "Hey, take care of yourself. Do what you need to take care of yourself." Sometimes she'll ask us, like, "What's one self-care thing that you're going to do today or this week?" And so, try to prioritize that because it can be really easy when you're an empathic person to prioritize the needs of other people before your own, or to get really emotionally invested and forget to take care of yourself. And so, that would be my third takeaway: is just really try to take care of yourself. Obviously, you're viewing this session today, or you're interested in this work because you're someone who cares about other people. And so remember that in doing that, you don't want to lose yourself, and you don't want to burn out to the point that you no longer have the capacity to care for people. And so take care of yourself, like find the ways that are the most meaningful and significant to you, and then make sure that you're practicing those often.
Thank you both so much for being here with us today. I want to give you all the opportunity to plug social medias, phone numbers, emails for us real quick.
Yes. Okay. So you can follow us on Twitter at UNT Survivor Ad. It's just
Ad.
ADV.
Uh-huh.
On Instagram, we're UNT Survivor Advocate. On Facebook, if you go to facebook.com/UNT Survivor Advocate, it's us. Our name doesn't change. And you can follow us and see what we're doing for the month of October, which is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. It's a great way to get in touch with us, get involved, or you can always email us at survivoradvocate@unt.edu.
If you're on campus, we share a suite with Student Legal Services. We're on the 4th floor of the Union, and so we're in Union 411. Callie right now works in the office twice a week. I'm working remotely, but when we are on campus, that's where you can find us. You can also go next door to Dean of Students, which is in Union 409, and they can get you connected to us if you need some additional assistance. And then you can also reach us at 940-565-2648. That's the main Dean of Students number, and they can get you connected to us as needed. But yes, the survivoradvocate@unt.edu is a great email address to reach us. And the final thing is, if you needed to report to anyone who's experienced something like this and needs to get in touch with us, please submit a sexual misconduct report online at report.unt.edu. That is the most efficient way to get us connected to a survivor who needs our support.
If you weren't able to get the contact information for the survivor advocates, we've included it here for you. Also, if you're interested in more events like this, please complete this brief survey.